Good morning. I'm Steve Wolf, Wholesale Marketing Associate at Sprague.
And I'm Joel Williams, Director of Refined Product Sales here at Sprague.
Welcome to Sprague's Refined Products Review, where we discuss what's moving the market and the insights we see every day. Well, Joel, a lot has changed in the last week. Where do we stand with the war in Iran?
Yeah, so last week we talked about there being three sort of paths forward. One was, the U.S. walking away, which we didn't think would happen. The second was diplomacy, which we thought the U.S. wanted the most. And the third was escalation, which is what we kind of felt was on the doorstep at that point, and that was last Tuesday. What we did see is an 11th hour ceasefire. And so diplomacy does seem to be the route that we are going down at the current state. That ceasefire, immediately the markets reacted very positively to that. Oil prices went way down. And what we've seen since then is that, the two sides really, they're still pretty far apart and there's a lot of stuff to go, but the ceasefire is still holding and negotiations are ongoing. So there is some hope that hopefully there can be a diplomatic solution to this war over in Iran.
So what's with the blockade then?
Yeah, the blockade's an interesting strategy, Steve. What we talked about last week was a little about Kharg Island and that being a potential pain point for Iran that the U.S. could pursue. The blockade just seems to be another version of that. And basically what the blockade is looking to do is to cut off any of Iran's revenue that's coming in from oil. Obviously, the entire war runs off that revenue as well as the entire country. So it is a very big pain point for the U.S. to hit. And, while the ceasefire is going on, you really, to kind of persuade Iran to continue to negotiate, you can escalate things militarily. And in a ceasefire, you try not to do that. So the next thing becomes what can you do financially? And I think this clearly is what the path the U.S. is headed down right now.
So what does all this mean for oil prices?
Yeah, Steve, like I always say, there's only three directions the oil prices can go. They can go up, they can go down, or they can stay the same. And what we saw last week was oil prices going down. Obviously, the market reacted very favorably to the talk about ceasefire and to the chance of negotiations, and any continuation of those talks will help to put downward pressure on the market, hoping for that solution. And then we get to this week. This week, what we're seeing is sort of a stay the same week. Monday, we saw prices up a little bit. Tuesday, we've seen prices down overall, net pretty even for the week. What that shows is that the market's really sort of taking a wait and see. The blockade provides some potential upward pressure, but the increased, negotiations prevent some downward. So it's really kind of let's see what happens from here. And then as for the up movement, that's the real one that we're waiting to see if anything could happen. This blockade will put Iran kind of back into a financial corner. And so the question becomes, how does Iran, handle that? Do they come back to the negotiation table and do we get to a diplomatic solution? But obviously, the U.S. Navy is now closer to Iran's coast, so Iran could strike the Navy. We could also see Iran attack other Gulf oil infrastructure, sort of that mantra of if you take away our oil, as a pressure point, well, we're going to take your oil and go after maybe that other pipeline in Saudi Arabia or other things that would make the Iranian oil even more valuable to the market. And then the worst case scenario we could see from any type of the blockade would be that China could start to get involved. The reality is that most of the Iranian oil is going to China. And so there's very few countries who have as much at stake from this blockade outside of Iran and the U.S. as China. So, that could obviously, throw a lot of fuel on this fire. Ultimately, right now, we're in the wait and see portion of this ceasefire. Ceasefires always present an option of hope and some hope for the market. And so you'll see that. But they're also very fragile. And so I think what we're going to see for the next sort of week or so of this ceasefire, unless it continues beyond that, is that we're really going to see, as the ceasefire negotiations continue, the markets will move pretty heavily based on headlines because that's all you'll be able to see until something's actually ratified. The other thing is that you could see the ceasefire break at any point in time. And what you really want to look for there is, the amount the market would go up if the ceasefire breaks really depends on how hard it breaks. Is it a rapid escalation? What happens? So that's really what we're kind of watching at this point.
So bringing it back to the Northeast, what are you seeing here?
The cargoes are still heading to Europe. We're seeing cash prices in the harbor are still very high. Backwardation as of right now is still almost 20 cents. So that's really, again, the market screaming that it needs inventory and that there's quite a bit of tightness out there. Another thing we'll see is that pricing will continue to be erratic. Costs are through the roof for suppliers right now, and that will have to be passed on to the market. You're also going to see, as suppliers continue to run on tight inventories, pricing could be all over the place. Sometimes people will be using price to move inventory. Other times people will be using it to sort of slow down sales so they can get to their next resupply. So, expect to see prices, continue to kind of jump all over the place out there. But the one thing as an industry that we do have going for us, at least for right now, is that in terms of the demand, we're really in an ideal time. We've just come out of the winter season. Heating systems are getting turned off. We're not quite at the summer season where the jet fuel and the gasoline consumption really ramps up. So, similar to how we see refineries do turnarounds in this time, it's because there's not a lot of demand. So, the good news is that we have a little bit of pressure off from that, but obviously as Memorial Day rolls around, we'll see that pressure ramp up quickly again.
Any last words of advice?
Yeah, I should say the same things that we say every week, which is really that, be careful out there. Things can change in an instance. Keep watching the news and stay in touch with your reps. Quite honestly, the best thing to do, is to watch our prices. If our prices are going up or down rapidly, watch our rack pricing, watch our middays, watch SRT. If you see price action moving very quickly, something major is going on. And so we'll be watching this 24/7 and making sure that we provide the customers with, real-time market updates, and they'll be able to see what prices are at. And I'd say, do the best you can to match those, go back to back. Again, buy what you can sell what you can buy. Other than that, there's not much else we can do in this time except wait and see what happens next.
Well, thanks so much for joining me, Joel.
Thank you very much for having me, Steve.
And if you haven't seen it yet, check out our latest special feature, A History of Sprague, available now on our YouTube channel.
Well, that's all we have for you today. Thanks again for joining us. We'll be back next Wednesday with another Refined Products Review. Refine your insight.
Fuel your success. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out our latest special feature, A History of Sprague. Now,